The wind screamed across the Texas panhandle like a warning that had come too late. Inside the dim saloon on the edge of Dust Hollow, a single lantern flickered as Ethan Cole stared at the cards in his hand, his jaw tight, his pulse pounding louder than the drunken laughter around him. Outside, thunder rolled low and heavy, shaking the warped wooden walls. Across the table, men watched him with hungry eyes. One wrong move now would cost him everything: his horse, his land, maybe his life. Sweat slid down Ethan's spine as the dealer turned the final card. The room went silent. Ethan didn't need to look up to know he'd lost. The bet he'd made, half drunk, half angry, had finally caught him. And this time, there would be no walking away. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The saloon erupted in noise the moment the loss was confirmed. Chairs scraped back. A man laughed too loudly. Someone slapped the table hard enough to rattle the bottles. Ethan Cole remained still, his gaze fixed on the scattered cards, as if staring long enough might change what they meant. But fate had never bent for him before, and it wasn't about to start now. "You know the terms," said a thick-voiced man near the bar. "A bet's a bet." Ethan stood slowly, every muscle in his body coiled. He had gambled away money before. Horses, pride, even blood. But this was different. This was the kind of loss that followed a man long after the dust settled. By sunrise, the story had already traveled through Dust Hollow. The cowboy who thought he could outrun consequence had finally been caught. And by noon, Ethan Cole found himself standing outside the small white chapel on Main Street, staring at a door he had never planned to walk through. Inside, Clara May Whitfield waited. She sat alone on the hard wooden bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her back straight in a way that came not from confidence but from long practice. The dress she wore was simple: cream cotton, sleeves mended once too often. A thin veil rested over dark hair pulled neatly back. Clara's face was pale, her gray eyes fixed on the floorboards as if they might offer answers no one else had given her. She had traveled 3 days by carriage from Amarillo. 3 days to meet a man she'd never spoken to. 3 days to become someone's wife because saying yes had seemed easier than staying invisible where she was. The door creaked open. Clara looked up. Ethan Cole stood framed by sunlight, his hat clutched in his hands like something unfamiliar. He was taller than she expected, his shoulders broad, his face worn by sun and wind. There was no arrogance in his eyes now, only tension and something like disbelief. For a long moment, neither spoke. This, the omniscient narrator might have noted, was the instant when 2 lives crossed not by choice, but by necessity. A gambler running from his past. A woman hoping not to disappear into hers. The preacher cleared his throat. The ceremony was short. Words spoken, vows exchanged that sounded hollow even as they were said. When Ethan slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, his hand shook slightly. She noticed. She noticed everything. Years of standing quietly beside others had sharpened her awareness in ways no one valued. By the time they stepped back into the afternoon heat, Dust Hollow had already decided what kind of marriage this was. People watched from windows, from porches, from behind half-closed doors. Some pitied her. Most judged him. No one asked how either of them felt. Ethan led Clara to the wagon in silence. The ride to his land was long and uncomfortable, the wheels creaking over uneven ground, the sky stretching endlessly overhead. Clara kept her hands folded, her posture careful. Ethan watched the horizon like a man measuring distance from something he didn't want to face. The house sat alone at the edge of open land, a small wooden structure battered by years of wind and neglect. A single cottonwood tree leaned nearby, its branches bare and restless. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice rough. Clara nodded. She stepped down from the wagon slowly, pain flaring low in her body, sharp and familiar. She hid it the way she always had, by moving carefully, by never complaining. Inside the house, dust coated every surface. The air smelled of old wood and loneliness. That night, they ate in silence. Beans, bread, water. Ethan sat across from her, uncomfortable beneath the lamplight. He had faced gunfire with steadier nerves than this quiet. When Clara finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "There's something you should know." Ethan looked up, tension rising in his chest. He had expected anger, tears, accusation, not this calm. "I move slowly sometimes," she continued. "Not because I'm lazy, because I hurt." The words hung between them. "I've been aching for years," Clara said, her hands tightening together. "From working too hard, from standing too long, from carrying more than I should have. I didn't tell anyone, not my father, not the doctor. People stop listening when you complain too much." Ethan felt something twist painfully in his chest. This wasn't confession born of weakness. This was truth shaped by years of being ignored. "I didn't marry you to cause trouble," she added. "I just didn't want you thinking I was broken." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was different now. Charged. Ethan pushed his chair back and stood, unsure what to do with the anger rising in him. Anger not at her, but at a world that had taught her to swallow pain quietly. "You're not broken," he said at last. Clara looked up, startled. No one had ever said that to her without condition. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Far off, thunder rolled again, closer this time. The narrator, with full knowledge of what was coming, would have recognized it as more than weather. It was a turning point, gathering strength. Neither Ethan nor Clara knew yet how much the coming storm would change them, but something had already shifted, and once it had, there would be no going back. The storm arrived just after midnight, without warning or mercy. One moment, the Texas Panhandle lay under a restless silence, the wind tugging lightly at the cottonwood branches outside the house. The next, thunder split the sky so violently that the walls shuddered as if struck by a fist. Clara woke with a sharp intake of breath, her heart racing before her mind fully caught up with the sound. Rain followed immediately, hard and heavy, pounding the roof like thrown stones. Ethan was already awake. He swung his legs off the narrow bed and stood still, listening. Years on the range had taught him to read weather the way other men read faces. This storm was wrong, too fast, too strong. Another crack of thunder shook the house. A sharp snap echoed overhead, followed by a low groan of stressed wood. "The roof," Ethan muttered. He grabbed his boots and pulled them on as he crossed the room. Clara sat up slowly, one hand braced against the mattress, pain flaring low in her body as she moved. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear tightening in her chest. "Storm's tearing in," Ethan said. "Stay here." But before she could respond, the ceiling above the kitchen gave a sharp crack. Water poured through in a sudden sheet, splashing hard onto the floor. Clara gasped as cold droplets hit her arm. Ethan cursed under his breath and rushed forward, dragging a bucket beneath the leak. Another followed near the back wall, then another. The storm intensified, wind howling through every gap in the boards. Rain forced its way inside as if the house itself were surrendering. "I'll go up," Ethan said, already shrugging into his coat. Clara stood, moving carefully but quickly. "You'll be swept off. If I don't try, we'll lose the whole roof." For a split second, fear flashed across her face. Not for the house, but for him. Ethan caught it, and something unfamiliar tightened in his chest. No one had looked at him like that in a long time. "I'll be quick," he said, softer now. He stepped out into the storm, the door slamming behind him. Rain soaked him instantly, cold and blinding. The ladder rattled beneath his weight as he climbed, wind nearly wrenching it from the wall. He hauled himself onto the roof, gripping the slick boards as the world seemed to tilt and roar around him. Inside, Clara moved through the chaos with quiet determination. She placed buckets where she could, dragged towels from a trunk, and pushed water toward the door with shaking hands. The pain in her body burned sharper now, but she ignored it. Pain was familiar. Losing everything was not. The roof groaned again. A section shifted, and rain poured harder. "Ethan," she whispered, though he could not hear her. Minutes stretched unbearably long. Each thunderclap felt closer than the last. Finally, the door burst open, and Ethan stumbled back inside, soaked through, his hands raw and bleeding. "It's bad," he said, breathless. "Boards are loose. I nailed what I could, but—" The ceiling cracked again, louder this time. "We need to move," he said. "Back room, now." He guided her down the narrow hall just as another section of plaster collapsed behind them. They crowded into the small room at the rear of the house, the only place still mostly dry. The walls shook, but they held. Clara sank down onto the floor, clutching a small wooden box to her chest. "What's that?" Ethan asked, lowering himself beside her. "My mother's things," she said. "Letters, a necklace. It's all I have left." Ethan nodded. "You chose right." Outside, the storm screamed like something alive. Rain lashed the walls. Wind tore at the cottonwood tree until its branches scraped the roof. In the narrow space, they sat shoulder to shoulder, both trembling, not just from cold, but from the realization of how close they'd come to losing everything. "You didn't have to go up there," Clara said quietly. "Yes, I did." She studied him in the flickering lamplight. "Most men wouldn't have." Ethan looked away. He didn't trust his voice. The truth was simpler and more dangerous than he wanted to admit. He hadn't gone up there because it was his house. He'd gone because it was hers now, too. When dawn finally broke, the storm left behind a shattered silence. Half the roof had caved in. The kitchen floor was soaked, furniture overturned, supplies ruined. The house looked beaten but still standing. Clara stepped into the wreckage and took it all in without tears. Her shoulders straightened. "We'll fix it," she said. Ethan turned to her. "No, we'll fix it together." Word traveled fast. By mid-morning, neighbors arrived with tarps, tools, and quiet offers of help. Martha Lou appeared with a basket of bread and a sharp, knowing look that missed nothing. "You two alive?" she asked. "We are," Clara said. Martha's gaze softened. "Good." Among the helpers was Henry Whitfield, Clara's father. His face drained of color when he saw the damage, then eased when Clara stepped forward, unharmed. "You all right?" he asked gruffly. "I am," she said. Ethan stayed. Henry studied Ethan for a long moment. Something passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, but acknowledgement. By afternoon, tarps covered the open roof. The worst was contained. As people drifted away, Ethan noticed the way they looked at Clara now, not with pity, with respect. That evening, as Clara folded salvaged linens, Ethan watched her quietly. "You didn't panic," he said. "Not once." She looked up. "You came back." The words hit him harder than the storm. She had expected him to run. "I'm not leaving," he said, surprising himself with how true it felt. Outside, clouds gathered again on the horizon. Not a storm this time, just weather waiting its turn. And both of them knew that what they'd faced tonight was only the beginning. Morning settled over the land in a way that felt cautious, as if the world itself were watching to see whether the house would truly hold. Sunlight filtered through the tarps, stretched across the damaged roof, casting uneven shadows across the kitchen floor. The air smelled of wet wood and earth. Clara moved slowly through the room, gathering what could still be used, her steps careful but purposeful. Ethan watched her from the doorway. He had grown used to measuring strength in loud ways, hard hands, sharp words, fast reactions. What he saw now unsettled him more than any storm. Clara worked without complaint, without drama, as if endurance had long ago become second nature. They fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Ethan repaired what he could, hammering loose boards back into place, resetting the fence posts the wind had knocked sideways, patching gaps where rain had forced its way in. Clara scrubbed mud from the floors, aired out linens, salvaged supplies. Sometimes they worked in silence. Sometimes they spoke in brief, practical exchanges. Each word built something neither of them named. Martha Lou stopped by every afternoon, always with a reason that sounded casual and a gaze that missed nothing. She brought stew one day, nails another, advice whether it was asked for or not. "You're standing straighter," Martha remarked to Clara on the third day, as if commenting on the weather. Clara paused, surprised. "Am I?" "You are," Martha said. "That's what happens when someone finally sees you." Clara didn't answer, but later, as she carried water from the well, she found herself thinking about the way Ethan listened when she spoke. Not politely, fully. By the end of the week, the house looked less like a wreck and more like a place recovering. Neighbors passed more often now, tipping hats, offering nods. Respect, Ethan noticed. Not for him, but for her. One afternoon, while Ethan worked on the fence line, Clara stepped outside holding a folded cloth. She hesitated, then walked toward him. "I thought you might need this," she said, offering the cloth. He took it, wiping sweat from his brow. Their fingers brushed. It was nothing, and yet it lingered. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I wanted to." That night, after supper, Ethan cleared the table while Clara mended a tear in his shirt. The lamplight softened her features, highlighted a loose strand of hair near her cheek. She hummed quietly as she worked, unaware he was listening. "You sing," he said. She startled slightly. "Only when I forget myself." "I don't mind." She smiled then, a small, uncertain smile that faded almost as quickly as it appeared. But Ethan felt it settle somewhere deep, warm and unsettling. The peace did not last. 3 days later, dust rose on the eastern horizon just before noon. Ethan noticed it first, his body tightening as instinct kicked in. He shaded his eyes, counting shapes as they broke free of the heat haze. 3 riders. They came fast, careless, the kind of men who treated land like something temporary. Ethan's jaw clenched. Clara saw his reaction and followed his gaze. "Who are they?" "Trouble," he said. "Get inside." But she didn't move. She stood where she was, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the approaching figures. The riders slowed 20 yards out. The one in front leaned forward in his saddle, a crooked grin spreading across his face. Caleb Rourke hadn't changed much. Still lean, still sharp-eyed, still carrying resentment like a badge. "Well, I'll be damned," Caleb called. "If it isn't Ethan Cole pretending he's settled." Ethan stepped forward. "You've got no business here." Caleb laughed. "Heard you got yourself a quiet wife. Figured I'd come see if the rumors were true." His gaze slid to Clara, dismissive, assessing. Something in her stiffened. "Leave," Ethan said. "Now." Caleb's hand twitched near his gun. Touchy. Before Ethan could react, Clara moved. She reached for the rifle leaning against the porch rail, lifting it with practiced steadiness. The shot cracked through the air, sharp and clean. Dirt exploded inches from Caleb's horse, making it rear violently. The laughter died instantly. Clara fired again, this time knocking the hat clean off one of the other riders. Her voice rang out, calm and unyielding. "The next shot won't miss." Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Caleb's grin faltered. He looked from Ethan to Clara, reassessing. "This ain't over," he snapped, backing his horse away. "Yes, it is," Clara said. "Ride." They did. When the dust settled, Clara's hands began to shake. The rifle slipped slightly. Ethan was beside her in an instant, steadying her grip. "You all right?" he asked. "I was terrified," she whispered, "but I couldn't let them hurt you." Something inside Ethan shifted, breaking open in a way that scared him more than the threat had. He pulled her gently into his arms. She hesitated only a moment before leaning into him, as if she had been waiting for permission all her life. "You were brave," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I just didn't run." "That's bravery," he replied. They stood that way longer than necessary, neither willing to be the first to let go. When they finally pulled apart, the air between them felt charged, fragile, full of possibility. That evening, Clara sat on the porch steps as the sun dipped low, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. Ethan joined her, handing her a cup of water. "You didn't have to stand with me today," he said. "Yes, I did," she answered. "I've been standing alone my whole life." He looked at her then, really looked. "You're not alone anymore." The words hung there, heavy with promise. Far off, thunder rumbled faintly. Not a storm yet, but a reminder. Trouble had come once, and it would come again. And when it did, neither of them would face it the same way as before. The night after Caleb Rourke rode away did not bring sleep easily. The land lay quiet, too quiet, as if the wind itself were holding its breath. Ethan sat at the small table long after the lamp had burned low, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, wood settling, tarps shifting faintly overhead. Every creak felt louder now, sharper. Clara lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling where shadows moved with the flicker of the flame. Her body ached from the strain of the day, but her mind refused rest. The image of Caleb's eyes lingered, calculating, cruel, never finished with anything once he believed it belonged to him. Near midnight, she rose carefully and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Ethan looked up as she entered the kitchen. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "So should you." She poured herself a cup of water and leaned against the counter, studying him. "He'll come back." Ethan didn't deny it. "Yes. And next time won't be just talk." "No." Silence settled between them, heavier than before. Clara felt it press against her ribs. She had spent years swallowing fear, pretending it didn't exist. But fear had a way of growing when left alone. "I don't want to be the reason you get hurt," she said at last. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're not the reason. Men like him don't need reasons." She nodded, absorbing that truth. Then I want to learn how to protect myself. He studied her face, searching for doubt. He found none. The next morning, he brought the rifle out into the open yard. Clara followed, her movements careful but determined. The air was crisp, the sky stretched wide and pale blue, indifferent to whatever decisions humans made beneath it. He showed her how to stand, how to steady her breath, how to let the world narrow to the sight and the target beyond it. She listened closely, adjusting when he corrected her stance, her grip. "You're tense," he said gently. "I've been tense my whole life. That'll throw off your aim." She exhaled slowly, shoulders lowering. When she fired, the shot struck cleanly, closer than either of them expected. Ethan blinked. "You've done this before." "My father taught me once," she said. "Said a woman should know how to protect her home." Then he stopped. "Thought it made me less suitable." "For who?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They practiced every afternoon. Neighbors noticed. Whispers followed them like shadows, but no one spoke aloud. Martha Lou watched from her porch one day, nodding to herself. "Good," she muttered. "About time." As Clara grew steadier with the rifle, something else shifted too. She spoke more freely now, her voice gaining confidence. She laughed once, softly, at something Ethan said about burning beans, and the sound caught him completely off guard. He froze, the moment etching itself into his chest. That night after supper, they sat on opposite sides of the table longer than necessary. The air felt different, charged, uncertain. "Why did you agree to marry me?" Ethan asked suddenly. Clara lowered her gaze. "Because I was tired of being invisible." The honesty in her voice left no room for pity. Ethan reached across the table before thinking, his hand resting over hers. "You're not invisible to me." She looked up, startled, her breath catching. For a moment, neither moved. Then she pulled her hand back gently, not rejecting him, just steadying herself. Outside, hooves thundered suddenly across the hard ground. Ethan was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. Clara followed him onto the porch, heart pounding. Caleb Rourke stood at the edge of the yard alone this time, his horse restless beneath him. The absence of his men made him more dangerous, not less. "Didn't expect you back so soon," Ethan called. Caleb smirked. "Couldn't stop thinking about what you have here." His eyes flicked to Clara, lingering too long. Something cold settled in her stomach. "This land isn't yours," Ethan said. "Neither is she," Caleb replied. "Men like you don't hold on to things." Clara raised the rifle, her hand steady despite the fear screaming inside her. "You're trespassing," she said. "Leave." Caleb laughed softly. "Or what?" The answer came not in words, but in action. Clara fired, the bullet slicing through the post beside Caleb's head. The crack echoed across the yard. Caleb's expression hardened. He backed his horse slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "You've changed," he said. "That's dangerous." "So is staying," Clara answered. He spat into the dirt and turned, riding off without another word. Only when he disappeared over the rise did Clara's knees threaten to give way. Ethan caught her, pulling her close. "You did exactly right," he murmured. She pressed her face into his chest, breathing him in. "I was afraid." "So was I." He lifted her chin, his thumb brushing her cheek. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them. When their lips met, the kiss was tentative at first, then warmer, deeper, full of everything unspoken. When they parted, Clara rested her forehead against his. "I don't want to hurt alone anymore," she whispered. "You won't," he promised. Later, lying awake beside him, Clara felt something unfamiliar settle into her bones. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of it. Outside, the night stretched on, patient and watchful. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Caleb Rourke was not finished, and both of them knew that whatever came next would demand more than courage. It would demand choice. The days following Caleb Rourke's second visit passed in a tense, watchful quiet. Nothing happened, and yet everything felt different. The land no longer seemed merely wide and empty. It felt exposed. Every distant sound made Ethan's shoulders tighten. Every unfamiliar shadow pulled Clara's attention toward the horizon. They did not speak of Caleb again, but his presence lingered between them like dust that refused to settle. Work continued, because it had to. Ethan finished reinforcing the fence line, driving the posts deeper into the ground, making the boundary clear and unyielding. Clara kept the house in order, though she tired more easily now. At first, she blamed the lingering strain from the storm and the days of hard labor that followed. She told herself rest would fix it, but rest did not stop the dizziness. One morning, as Clara bent to lift a bucket from the well, the world tilted sharply. Her vision blurred, her knees weakening beneath her. She caught herself against the wooden frame, breath shallow, heart racing. Ethan was beside her in an instant. "Clara," he said, steadying her. "Sit down." "I'm fine," she insisted automatically, even as the words felt untrue. He guided her to the porch steps anyway, watching her with a concern she could no longer ignore. She rested her head in her hands, waiting for the spinning to ease. "This has been happening," she admitted quietly. "In the mornings, I feel sick, tired." Ethan frowned. "Since when? A little while? How long is a little while?" She hesitated. "Long enough that I should have said something." The truth settled slowly between them, fragile and heavy. Ethan had known fear before, real fear, sharp and immediate, but this was different. This crept in quietly, changing the shape of everything. They went into town that afternoon, the ride silent except for the sound of the wagon wheels against the road. Clara's hands stayed folded in her lap, her posture careful. Ethan kept his gaze forward, his thoughts racing ahead of him. Dr. Ellis was an older man with tired eyes and gentle hands. He asked his questions softly, listened carefully, then stepped out of the room for what felt like far too long. When he returned, he smiled. "Well," he said, "it appears you're going to have a child." The words echoed, unreal. "A child," Ethan repeated faintly. Clara's breath caught. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, fear and wonder colliding all at once. "Yes," the doctor continued. "You're healthy. The baby seems strong. You'll need rest. Care. Care." The word struck Ethan harder than anything else. Care meant staying. It meant planning. It meant a future he had never allowed himself to imagine. They walked home slowly, neither speaking until the house came into view. When they finally stopped on the porch, Clara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "How do you feel about it?" she asked quietly. The question cut deeper than she knew. Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I've never been good at staying. I've never been good at this." She nodded, tears shining but unfallen. "I'm scared too." He reached for her hands, holding them firmly. "But I'm not running. Not from you. Not from our child." The relief that crossed her face broke something open inside him. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, breathing in slowly. That night, sleep came in fragments. Ethan lay awake beside her, listening to her steady breathing, his mind turning over the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. For the first time in his life, the thought did not send him searching for an exit. It made him want to build walls strong enough to keep danger out. The next morning, Martha Lou arrived unannounced, as usual. One look at Clara's pale face and Ethan's guarded expression told her everything. "Well," she said briskly, setting a basket on the table, "that explains the glow and the worry." Clara blinked. "You knew?" "I suspected," Martha replied. "Women know these things. Congratulations." She squeezed Clara's hand gently, then turned her sharp gaze on Ethan. "You'll need to be careful now. Trouble has a way of sensing weakness." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan spotted movement along the ridge. Dust rose again, slow and deliberate this time. Clara saw it too. Her hand tightened around the railing. "He's back," she said. 3 riders emerged from the fading light. Caleb Rourke rode at the front, his posture loose, confident. His men flanked him, eyes hard, hands near their weapons. Ethan stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between Clara and the yard. "Stay behind me," he said. She shook her head. "No, we stand together." Caleb's grin widened as they approached. "Heard some interesting news in town," he called. "Figured I'd come see if it was true." His gaze dropped, lingering on Clara's midsection just long enough to make Ethan's blood run cold. "You don't belong here," Ethan said, voice steady despite the fury burning beneath it. Caleb laughed. "I think you owe me something, Cole. You embarrassed me." He lifted his gun, not toward Ethan, toward Clara. Ethan moved without thought. He shoved Clara behind him and fired. The crack split the air, sharp and final. Caleb's horse reared violently, throwing him backward into the dirt. His men froze, panic flashing across their faces. Another shot rang out. This one from Clara, aimed wide but loud, decisive. The message was clear. "Leave," she shouted. "Now." They didn't hesitate. Within seconds, the riders fled, dust trailing behind them as they vanished over the ridge. Ethan lowered his rifle slowly, his chest heaving. He turned to Clara, pulling her into his arms. She trembled against him, one hand pressed protectively to her stomach. "I won't let anything happen to you," he whispered, "or to our child." She nodded against his chest, tears soaking his shirt. "I know." As the sun slipped below the horizon, the land fell quiet once more. But the quiet was different now. It carried resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Winter settled over the land slowly, as if unsure it was welcome. The first frost came light, silvering the grass at dawn before melting away under the sun. Then colder nights followed, bringing a quiet that felt earned rather than empty. The house, patched and reinforced, stood firm against the wind. Smoke curled steadily from the chimney each morning, a small but stubborn sign of life. Clara spent more time near the fire now, her movements gentler, her hands often resting over the small, growing curve of her belly. The pain that once lived constantly in her body had eased, not vanished, but softened. She rested when she needed to, and for the first time in her life, no one made her feel guilty for it. Ethan worked harder than he ever had. He repaired walls, rebuilt the porch, and strengthened the roof until it could withstand whatever storms might come next. His hands grew rougher, his shoulders broader from labor done with purpose. Each hammer strike felt like a promise being kept. The town noticed. People no longer whispered when Clara passed. They nodded. They smiled. Some stopped to ask after her health, after the baby. She answered calmly, no longer shrinking beneath the tension. She had learned, slowly and carefully, that being seen did not always mean being judged. But peace, as both of them knew, never came without testing. It happened on a cold afternoon, when the sky hung low and gray. Ethan was splitting wood behind the house when the distant sound of hooves carried across the land. His body tensed before his mind caught up. He straightened, listening. 3 riders crested the ridge. Clara felt it too. She stood from her chair by the window, one hand braced against the table, her breath tightening. "He's back," she said softly. Ethan crossed the room in 3 long strides and took his rifle from the wall. He paused, meeting her eyes. "You don't move," he said. She shook her head, calm but firm. "We face this together." They stepped onto the porch side by side as the riders approached. Caleb Rourke rode at the front, his posture rigid, anger etched deep into his face. His men followed, quieter now, their bravado dulled by memory. "You should have left when you had the chance," Caleb called. "Now you've made things worse." Ethan raised his rifle but did not aim it yet. "This ends today." Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. His gaze slid again to Clara's belly, lingering just long enough to twist something sharp and furious in Ethan's chest. "You think you've won?" Caleb said. "You think this land belongs to you?" Before Ethan could answer, Caleb's hand moved. Time slowed. Ethan saw the angle of the gun, saw where it was pointed. He moved without hesitation, stepping fully in front of Clara and firing. The shot rang out, echoing across the frozen ground. Caleb's horse reared violently, throwing him backward. His men scrambled, shouting, panic breaking through their bravado. Clara raised her rifle, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Leave, now." One of the men fired wildly into the air, then turned and fled. The other followed. Caleb lay in the dirt, wounded but alive, his gun far from reach. He glared up at Ethan, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over," he spat. Ethan stood over him, steady and unyielding. "Yes, it is." Sheriff Boone arrived not long after, summoned by the sound of gunfire and shouting. He took one look at the scene and shook his head. "About time," he muttered. Caleb was taken away in chains, his threats fading into the cold air as he disappeared down the road. The land grew quiet again, deeper and truer than before. That night, Ethan sat beside Clara by the fire, his arm wrapped around her as she leaned into his chest. "I was afraid," she admitted softly. "So was I," he said. "But you stayed." "Yes," he replied, "and I always will." Spring came gently, almost shy after the hard winter. Wildflowers pushed through the thawing ground, color returning to the land inch by inch. The house stood whole now, warm and solid. The porch rebuilt strong enough to hold a rocking chair Ethan had crafted himself. Clara spent her mornings there, wrapped in a shawl, watching the horizon. Her laughter came more easily now, her smiles lasting longer. Ethan whistled when he worked, a habit that surprised him as much as anyone. The baby arrived on a clear morning, just as the sun crested the hills. The cries filled the house, sharp and full of life. Ethan held the small, warm bundle with trembling hands, awe settling over him like a weight he welcomed. Their child's fingers curled instinctively around his thumb, and something inside him finally, fully stilled. Later, as Clara rested, pale and exhausted but smiling, Ethan sat beside her, their baby cradled between them. "You're not aching anymore," he said quietly. She nodded, tears slipping free. "Because I don't have to hurt alone." Outside, the wind moved softly through the cottonwood tree, no longer a threat, but a presence. The land stretched wide and open, no longer something to outrun. Ethan Cole, once a man who gambled everything because he believed he had nothing to lose, now knew better. He had a home, a wife who stood beside him, a child who carried their future forward. And for the first time in his life, staying felt like winning. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.